In the fast-paced life of Manhattan, Jonathan, a cold millionaire, used to absolute control, lived alongside Emily, his former secretary, now an ambitious woman obsessed with luxury, designer bags, and a life of lavish display. It was supposed to be just an afternoon coffee to go over wedding details. But in a single moment of distraction, the unexpected happened. Victoria, homeless, hungry, and with a mysterious past, stole a croissant from their table. What no one could have imagined is that this small act of theft would change the course of their lives. Amid secrets, suspicion, loyalty, and a shocking discovery, they will have to decide, does our past define who we are, or is it what we choose to do once everything falls apart? Enjoy the story. It was a cloudy afternoon in New York City, and the most elegant cafe on the corner. A place of marble tables, golden cutlery, and soft French background music was nearly full. There, by the large glass window overlooking the busy sidewalk, Jonathan Bellamy chose a discreet table. Wealthy, respected, and the CEO of a tech company headquartered in Manhattan, he was accompanied by Emily, his current girlfriend. Emily was what many would call perfect, at least on the outside. Impeccable hair, calculated makeup, designer clothes that hugged every curve with precision, and a sharp voice that loved to be heard. I just can't believe Brenda showed up in the same dress as mine at the Dior dinner. It was pathetic, Emily said, laughing loudly while checking her lipstick in her phone's mirror. Jonathan smiled, though he wasn't really listening. For weeks, maybe even months, he'd been questioning that relationship. There was beauty, status, but something was missing, something real. I'm going to the counter to grab a newspaper, he said, rising without hurry. Emily took the chance to go to the restroom and retouch her makeup. The table was left empty. Moments later, a waitress arrived with a creamy cappuccino, a strong espresso, and 2 steaming golden croissants. She set them down quickly and walked off to answer another call. That was when something unusual happened. Outside, standing discreetly near the large window, a young woman was watching intently. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, her coat was worn and dirty, and her shoes looked like they had walked for miles. But there was something in her face, even beneath the dust and exhaustion, that stood out. Clear, bright eyes that spoke more than any words could. The smell of the croissant hit her like a punch to the stomach. She hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days. Her hunger was deep and quiet. On impulse, she reached through the small gap in the window and pulled one of the croissants out. She barely had time to take the first bite. "What do you think you're doing?" Emily shrieked, suddenly appearing in front of the scene, as if rehearsed for a stage. Jonathan, returning with the newspaper in hand, stopped in the middle of the cafe. Time seemed to slow down. Victoria, yes, that was the young woman's name, recoiled, startled. The croissant still trembled in her hand. "This is outrageous. A thief, a homeless person, in our cafe," Emily shouted, drawing attention from everyone around. "Emily, please," Jonathan said calmly. "Lower your voice. Do you see what she did? She stole. She should be arrested." Victoria began to cry. "I'm sorry, please, I was so hungry. I didn't mean to." Her voice was weak, but sincere. Every word weighed heavier than the last. The waiter approached, embarrassed, trying to de-escalate the situation. But Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder. "I've got this. Let me handle it." He turned to Victoria, who was already backing away from the window in tears. "Hey!" he called, stepping out through the side door. "Wait, please, don't go." Emily watched in silent shock as Jonathan left the croissant on the table and followed the homeless girl out onto the sidewalk. There, in front of the rushing city, the two stood face to face. She could barely hold his gaze. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Victoria. Are you okay? Are you hungry?" She nodded, eyes full of tears. Then, through sobs, she whispered, "I didn't want to steal. I just couldn't keep pretending I don't exist." Jonathan wasn't a man easily impressed. Used to billion-dollar deals, fragile loyalties, and cold social events, he had seen it all, except the raw sincerity he saw in Victoria's eyes at that moment. "I didn't want to steal," she repeated, trembling. "But hunger, it changes people." Jonathan hesitated for a second. What should he do? Go back inside and listen to Emily complain about mirrors and rivals? Pretend nothing had happened? Or follow that quiet impulse growing inside him? He chose to listen. "Do you have a place to sleep?" he asked. Victoria remained silent. "And your family?" Silence. She looked down. The croissant was now crushed in her hands. "I'm sorry. I don't usually talk about this with anyone. I'm tired of pretending I'm invisible." Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was something else. He invited her in to finish the coffee, but Victoria refused. She was embarrassed. She only asked to take the croissant, thanked him with her eyes lowered, and turned to leave. But Jonathan wouldn't let it end like that. "Wait," he said, pulling a card from his pocket. "If you change your mind, if you need anything, call me. I mean it." She took the card with shaky hands, hesitant. He smiled. "And Victoria?" She turned slowly. "You're not invisible." That night, Jonathan barely slept. Emily, of course, made sure to turn the whole episode into a monologue of humiliation. "Did you see what that tramp did? What a show. And you ran after her? Are you out of your mind?" He just looked at her, in silence. Something inside him had already shifted. And Emily, with all her artificial beauty and sharp words, began to feel small. 2 days later, Jonathan's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello." Silence. Then a weak voice. It's Victoria. You said you were serious." She was in a temporary shelter. It was pouring rain that day, and her voice sounded wetter than her coat. Jonathan sent a car for her. When the car arrived, Jonathan greeted her with ease. He offered hot tea, a dry towel, and asked her to sit in the back lounge, away from the staff's eyes. There was no rush, no judgment, just a man intrigued by an unusual situation, and by a person who seemed to be much more than she appeared. Victoria hesitated, but gradually began to speak. "My parents died when I was 10. It was a road accident. After that, I was sent to an orphanage." "And after that?" Jonathan asked gently. "When I turned 18, no one had adopted me. They gave me a bag of clothes, an address to a shelter, and a good luck. I stayed in a shelter for a while, but it was a dark place. I saw things there that didn't match what my parents had taught me." She lowered her eyes. There was dignity in every word, even when marked by sadness. "I always held on to my values. I'd rather live on the streets than stay in a place where cruelty was normal. I slept in train stations, found old books in donation bins, tried to stay human. But some days it's hard." Jonathan didn't know what to say. It moved him in a way he didn't expect. He didn't just see a homeless young woman. He saw someone who fought every day to preserve what was left of herself. He thought for a few seconds, then said, "Are you looking for work?" Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. "This isn't charity. I have a mansion. Too big. Too many people. One of the staff just left. It's a simple job cleaning. But honest. Steady work with a salary, meals, a shower, a room in the staff wing, and someone to train you." She stayed still as if trying to figure out if this was real. "Why?" she asked sincerely. "Why would you offer me this?" Jonathan sighed. "Because I see something true in you, and because no one should be invisible." Then he called Amelia, the head housekeeper. "I want you to prepare a room, and teach her the basics. She'll join the cleaning team. Treat her with respect." "Of course, Mr. Bellamy," Amelia replied, though her face showed surprise and confusion. Victoria entered that house as if stepping into a sacred place. Shy, wearing clean clothes provided by Amelia, her hair still damp, eyes alert. "Thank you," "Mr. Jonathan." He simply nodded. "Welcome. Just do your best," and walked away without looking back, because at that moment, he felt nothing but a strange sense of responsibility. Something inside told him this was the right thing to do. What he didn't know was that this simple decision would completely change his life. Victoria was slowly starting to get used to her new routine. In her free time, she liked to sit in the garden with a book borrowed from the staff library. She breathed in the fresh air with the serenity of someone who, for the first time, felt safe. Sometimes she closed her eyes and tried to imagine, if I save up some money, maybe I can rent a small room, buy a tiny house, have a real life. She became friends with Marie, the oldest cook in the house, a kind woman who loved embroidery. They discovered this by chance, when Marie noticed Victoria looking fondly at the decorative kitchen towels. "You like embroidery, dear? I learned in the orphanage. It's been a while since I held a needle." Marie lent her an old box of colorful threads and a hoop. At night, Victoria would embroider in silence. It was like stitching pieces of herself back together. Even with these small moments of peace, Victoria was always ready to help in any part of the house. She assisted whoever needed it, as if it still wasn't enough to repay what Mr. Jonathan had done for her. She avoided crossing paths with him. There was respect, but also caution. Jonathan, for his part, kept his distance. To him, it was still just an act of humanity, a small effort to do something right in a world filled with superficiality. But not everyone saw it that way. Emily showed up unannounced at the mansion 3 days later. She wore stiletto heels, dark sunglasses, and carried 2 shopping bags, one from Hermès, the other from Louis Vuitton. She walked as if on a runway, her heels echoing on the marble like a warning shot. "Jonathan, I missed you," she said, expecting an affectionate kiss or warm greeting. She got a distracted nod instead. He greeted her politely, but kept typing something on his phone. "And that one?" Emily stopped, frowning as she saw Victoria walk by carrying a bucket and rubber gloves. Jonathan answered bluntly, "She's a new employee." Emily smiled without smiling. "Employee? The same girl from the cafe? What a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence. I hired her." "You must be joking. She needed a job, and I needed someone trustworthy." "Trustworthy? Jonathan, she stole a croissant." "She was hungry, Emily." Emily remained silent for a few seconds, but her eyes said everything. The next morning, Victoria was cleaning the corridor that led to the main hall when she heard the sharp sound of shattering glass. She turned and saw Emily staring at her with a cold smile. "What a shame. That glass was very expensive. Looks like someone's got a mess to clean up." Victoria crouched down silently. The gloves protected her hands from the shards, but not from other kinds of wounds. A bit further up the stairs, Jonathan had witnessed the scene. He said nothing, but slowly descended the steps. When Emily found him minutes later, he simply said, "Please avoid doing that to the staff. No one here is above anyone else." "You're defending her?" "I'm protecting the atmosphere of my home." Emily narrowed her eyes. She could see that, even though Jonathan said nothing, something in him was changing. Not because of Victoria, but because of everything she unknowingly represented. Since the broken glass incident, the atmosphere in the mansion had grown heavier. Victoria didn't say a word to anyone. She simply picked up the shards, cleaned the floor, and went back to work. But inside her, an old feeling began to spread. That no matter how hard she tried, there would always be someone wanting to push her back to the ground. Marie, the cook, sensed the tension. "It was Emily, wasn't it?" she asked quietly one afternoon, while they prepared a simple vanilla cake together. Victoria hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Don't let her steal what you have inside, girl. You're light, and she lives in the dark." Victoria didn't respond, but those words stayed with her. In the following days, despite the tension, she kept her rhythm. She cleaned, organized, helped in the kitchen, changed linens and placed fresh flowers in the vases. Simple flowers, but ones that brought life to the house. And in her free time, there she was again. In the garden, a book in her lap, embroidery thread in her hand. Little by little, something curious began to happen. Other staff members started to seek her out. They asked for simple advice, an extra hand with heavy chores, an honest glance amid the silence. And Victoria was always there, present, humble, attentive. She had no intention of standing out. But her quiet presence began to speak louder than any speech. Jonathan watched it all from afar. Discreetly, there was no romantic gaze, only curiosity, and maybe a certain discomfort with himself. He was beginning to realize there was a fundamental difference between Emily and Victoria. While one demanded presence and recognition constantly, the other transformed the atmosphere without making a sound. On a cloudy morning, Amelia walked into his office with a worried expression. "Mr. Bellamy, may I speak with you?" "Of course. What is it?" She hesitated. Miss Emily told 2 staff members that Victoria was expelled from a shelter for theft. She said the police filed a report. Jonathan frowned. "Is that true?" "No. According to what Victoria told me, she left on her own. She didn't want to be around certain things. And there was never any police involvement." Jonathan nodded silently. "She's trying to damage her," he said firmly. "Yes, and the staff has started to talk." That afternoon, he made a decision. He called a meeting with the entire staff. "From now on, any derogatory comment about another employee will be grounds for a formal warning," he said clearly and directly. "Everyone here has the right to work in peace. Respect is a rule, not a favor." Emily wasn't present, but she heard about the meeting and exploded. "You're protecting her? Is that it?" "I'm protecting what's right. Nothing more. She's got you fooled with that poor little girl act," she shouted. "Open your eyes, Jonathan. She just wants what you can give." "And you?" he replied calmly. "What do you want, Emily?" She fell silent, for the first time with no answer. That evening, Victoria was in the garden, sewing quietly under the soft light of the setting sun. Marie brought her a cup of tea, sat beside her, and said, "You know what I've noticed, girl?" "What?" "You've stirred the whole house, without raising your voice, and that bothers people who've never learned to be loved in silence." Victoria smiled sadly. She didn't want to bother anyone. She just wanted a place where she could exist. Jonathan watched from the window. He didn't look at her with desire, but with a kind of respect he wasn't used to feeling. She didn't know it yet, but little by little, she was reshaping everything. Not just inside the mansion, but inside him too. Breakfast at the mansion had always been a quiet yet efficient ritual. Jonathan, impeccable as usual, reviewed papers on the table while taking the first sip of his day. It was the day of an important negotiation, a merger that had been in the works for months. Then a small slip. "Damn it!" he exclaimed, spilling coffee on his navy blue tie. "I can't believe it. This tie was a gift from my father. I always wear it for big meetings. It's my lucky charm." Victoria, who was collecting dishes from one end of the table, hesitated for a moment. Then she took 2 steps forward. "Sir, if I may, I think I can get that stain out. If you'd like, I could try to clean it." Jonathan stood up, still irritated, trying to remove the tie in a hurry. His fingers fumbled between the knot and his shirt. That's when Victoria, without thinking, reached out. "Here, let me help." The gesture was quick, automatic. But the moment her fingers touched his collar, they both froze, face to face. She realized just how spontaneous, maybe invasive, the gesture had been. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back, eyes lowered. "No, it's fine," Jonathan replied, surprised at his own calm. Victoria took the tie with her. When Jonathan went up to his office, still muttering about the time, she returned a few minutes later with the tie dry, clean and perfectly pressed. "Sir, I managed to remove the stain. Here it is." She placed the tie gently on the table. He watched her walk out of the room, saying nothing. Then he picked up the tie. His gaze lingered longer than usual. Emily noticed, not that day, but the next, and the one after that. Jonathan had grown more distant, colder, and she knew something had shifted. She tried to be more present, arranged impromptu dinners, bought tickets to an exclusive play, ordered an expensive gift, a rare Rolex watch. He remained cold. Emily felt threatened by Victoria, even if she never showed it to anyone. That was when she had an idea to get closer. If Victoria trusted her, by her principles, she would never approach Jonathan. Emily knew that and planned to use it to her advantage. One afternoon, Jonathan was working from home, locked in his office, dealing with contracts and reports. Emily was in the mansion, bored, wandering through her empire with no real purpose. She walked over to the phone, pressed a button, and called the kitchen. "Please ask Victoria to bring me a glass of fresh orange juice and some fruit with yogurt. I want to have my snack on the suite's balcony today." Victoria obeyed. It was the first time she'd ever been to the suite. As she pushed the door open, she paused. The room was spacious, lit by soft curtains that danced in the wind. There was marble on the floor, tall mirrors on the walls, and a faint perfume in the air, as if the space had been designed to impress. She stood there for 2 seconds, static, struck by the grandeur. She took a deep breath, composed herself, crossed the room, and reached the balcony. The view was breathtaking. A dense, green forest, pure nature, complete silence. Nearby, a built-in jacuzzi, surrounded by foliage and candles that added warmth. Must be incredible at night with all the lights on, she thought. Emily was already seated, wearing a white silk robe. When she saw Victoria, she smiled, but it was a practiced, artificial smile. "Impressed by what you see?" "Oh, thank you," she said with rehearsed sweetness. "I'm sorry, Victoria. That's your name, right? I think I was unfair to treat you badly, and to doubt you." Victoria, flustered, replied humbly, "Please, no need to apologize. I understand it's hard to welcome a stranger into the house. Everyone here has history, years of trust. But I'm really grateful for everything you and Mr. Jonathan have done for me. This has changed my life, and I promise to give it my all to deserve this chance. You can always count on me, Mrs. Emily." "Good to hear that," Emily replied, stirring her yogurt without looking at her. Victoria excused herself and left, still amazed by everything she'd seen. She thought everything was finally going right. A few minutes later, Jonathan was working in silence when he heard a soft thud at the door. He looked up. Emily was standing there, pale, gripping the doorframe. "Jonathan, help me. I don't feel well," she said before collapsing. Jonathan jumped to his feet. He ran to her. "Call for help," he shouted, picking her up and rushing down the stairs just in time to see the driver entering the garage. "To the hospital. Fast." On the way, Emily slowly opened her eyes. "Take me to San Rafael? My doctor, Dr. Derek Patson." Those were her only words before fainting again. Jonathan, frantic, clutched her hand. "Faster. Straight to San Rafael." They arrived, and Dr. Derek immediately took over Emily's care and led her to a treatment room. Jonathan wanted to go with her, but wasn't allowed. Took a while before the doctor returned. Jonathan stood up immediately, anxious. "Mr. Bellamy," Derek began, "what I have to tell you is delicate. We found an unusual chemical substance in Miss Emily's system. Fortunately, it's not lethal, but it did cause her symptoms. We can confirm it was a case of poisoning." Jonathan felt the ground vanish beneath him. "Poisoning?" Yes, she mentioned drinking juice just before feeling ill. We need to keep her under observation. But she's out of danger. Do you have any idea who could have done this? Jonathan shook his head. He entered the room and saw Emily pale, hooked to and fore. He sat beside her. She opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "Who would do this to me, Jonathan?" Back at the mansion, the news spread. The kitchen staff was questioned. The juice Emily drank hadn't been fully consumed, allowing for quick testing. The lab confirmed the doctor's findings. Then came the bombshell. "They found a bottle," said Amelia, gathering the staff. "It was in the main house trash, only accessible by employees. Victoria was among them." She froze inside. "I only delivered the tray. I didn't touch anything," she said, wide-eyed. No one answered. The air was thick with suspicion. By evening, Jonathan called her to the office. She walked in slowly, still confused. He stood by the window, arms crossed. "I don't know what to think," he said bluntly. "Everything points to you. Mr. Jonathan, please believe me. I would never do anything like that. Never." He hesitated, took a deep breath. His voice was firm, heavy. "I trusted you, Victoria. But now, I have a hospitalized woman, a doctor, a report, a bottle with the substance, and no other name involved." She fought back tears. I understand." Jonathan looked away. "You're fired, and I hope you never come back." Victoria packed her few belongings in silence. She didn't beg, didn't scream, didn't question. She simply walked out the same door through which she once thought everything would finally go right. Outside, the sky was growing dark. Jonathan spent the night at the hospital. He sat beside Emily, silent, watching her breathing stabilize. Deep down, something felt off, but he couldn't name it. Just fatigue, frustration with his own intuition. "How didn't I see it coming?" he wondered. The next morning he brought flowers. An elegant, discreet bouquet. Emily smiled when he walked in. "Jonathan," she said, touching his hand. "I always felt that woman was untrustworthy. Since day one. She just saw a chance to take your money. She played the victim. She wanted to seduce you with that pitiful story. It was all planned." Jonathan nodded, a lump in his throat. "I felt pity, wanted to help, thought I was doing the right thing. But it was a mistake. I already let her go." Emily squeezed his hand tighter. "Let's forget all this. She's gone. She'll never show up again. That fraud won't stop us from moving forward. Let's focus on our wedding. Okay?" Jonathan took a deep breath, staring at the bouquet in his hands. "Sure. Let's forget it all." Emily recovered surprisingly fast. The next day, she was discharged and returned to the mansion with Jonathan. The following morning, she woke up like a teenage girl, surrounded by bridal magazines and Pinterest boards. "Love. Look at these references. I was thinking something outdoors with white orchid paths, hanging candles, that orchestra from Lily's wedding. Remember? Crystals. Lots of crystals over the dance floor, mirrored flooring." Jonathan sat at the table, sipping his coffee. He heard, but didn't really listen. "Can you help me set the date with the planner?" He nodded absently. "Of course." Emily beamed, opening tabs, saving dress photos, designer options, elite caterers. But what she didn't know was that not everything would be white flowers and string quartets. Emily crossed paths with Marie in the hallway. She smiled with exaggerated sweetness. "Marie, please bring me that special lavender tea. I need to relax. This week's gonna be intense. Wedding, decisions, flowers, buffets." "Of course, miss," Marie replied with polite indifference. But the moment she turned around, her mind lit up. When did Emily start being nice to Victoria? And why that week did she ask her to bring her food? Emily never let new staff into the suite. That was an unspoken rule. Other things bothered Marie too. She saw and heard everything. Jonathan didn't want a scandal, didn't call the police, didn't get lawyers involved, didn't open an investigation, told himself it was over, but his heart wasn't convinced. Emily, on the other hand, seemed at peace. She treated the hospital stay as a mere scare. The wedding preparations were her new obsession. But Marie watched quietly. 2 days later, Jonathan asked security for the surveillance footage from the week of the incident. "I want to see the footage from the day Emily got sick." "The sweet entrance," he said calmly but firmly. Emily heard the request from the hallway and froze, then smiled. "Still on that, love?" she said sweetly. "Let's move on. It's over. You did what you had to. I'm here, safe. Because of you. Let's focus on the wedding." Jonathan nodded but said nothing. Later, while he showered, Emily quickly accessed his laptop. She typed the password she had memorized months ago, checked the history. She read the last searches. Dr. Derek Patson medical record, toxicology report for non-lethal plant-based substance. How to fake hospital reports. Emily went pale. She shut the laptop and hurried downstairs. In the garden, where the Wi-Fi signal was weaker, she called the doctor. "Derek? It's me, Emily. Listen, Jonathan's suspicious. He's digging. He looked into your record, researched our product." A pause. "No, nothing's happened yet. But we need to align our story. Got it? You know what's at stake. And, please, if he calls anyone, we say you already sent the originals. Don't let him recheck the tests. Okay? Say the files were archived. Don't mess up, Derek. You know what we risk." What Emily didn't see was the woman stitching in silence among the plants, crouched, holding an embroidery hoop in one hand and a phone in the other. Marie, recording everything. That night, Marie climbed the stairs slowly, knocked on the office door. Jonathan was alone, typing on his computer. She said nothing, just extended the phone, video open. "You'd better listen, sir. Until the end." Jonathan listened. Every word, every pause, every lie. His expression didn't change, but his eyes didn't blink once. At the end, he simply said, "Thank you, Marie." He stayed up all night, connecting the dots. The next morning, Emily woke early to meet the stylist. She was trying on a white gown with hand-applied crystals when Jonathan entered the room. "Love, look at this. It's perfect for a garden ceremony. Matches the white orchids." "You know what else would match that dress?" he interrupted. She turned, surprised by his tone. A courtroom. Silence. Jonathan held out the phone. Let her hit play herself. Emily listened, swallowed hard. That was out of context. "I just..." "Stop," he said calmly. "I've heard enough. Jonathan, you don't understand. It was for love. I did it for us, to protect us. You poisoned the only honest person who ever set foot in this house, and made me believe she was dangerous. You pushed away the one person who never asked me for anything but respect." Emily tried to approach. "We can get through this. Start over." "No. You'll leave this house today. And if you try to manipulate me again, I'll take that recording straight to the police." Emily didn't cry, didn't scream, just grabbed her purse and left, wrapped in that wedding dress with the same artificial dignity she always carried. "You'll regret this, Jonathan." Jonathan remained alone, ran a hand over his face, took a deep breath. For the first time in months, something finally felt clear. But when he thought of Victoria, he feared it might be too late to fix the damage. Still, something inside told him she needed to hear the truth from him. Jonathan tried everything to find her. Went to shelters, made calls, used fake names to avoid attention. Searched social media, photos, lists. But the city was too big, and she had vanished. Time passed, but life didn't return to normal. He went to and from work every day. And every day, his eyes scanned the sidewalks, corners, and storefronts, searching without looking like he was. Jonathan had always thought about buying a country house. He liked the idea of total silence. It was an old desire to have a place to escape to on the weekends. But Emily always dismissed it, saying life happens in the city. The countryside is for people stuck in the past. It's boring. With his fast-paced business life and full social calendar, Jonathan kept postponing, letting the desire grow old in the drawer, until months later an old friend called. He knew Jonathan had always wanted a countryside property. He was selling the family estate, a large, well-kept house, surrounded by nature on all sides. No listings, private sale. Jonathan had priority if he wanted to visit. He accepted. Left alone in the afternoon, driving his own car. Soft instrumental music played, something he always put on when he wanted to think. The road was long and calm, and Jonathan traveled not just physically, but mentally. Maybe I could have horses there. A private lake. He wasn't thinking about living there, but he liked the idea of belonging to a place where no one expected anything from him. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee, imagining his days in the countryside house. And for a moment Jonathan felt at peace, until the light turned red, and the city called him back, in the most unexpected way. There, across the street, a small flower shop, and at the door, stepping out with a bouquet in her arms, Victoria. Her hair was tied up, a few loose strands around her neck. She wore simple but neat clothes, and she smiled, that same smile he had seen at the mansion. She handed the flowers to an elderly woman with a gentle gesture, walked her to the door, gave a small thank you bow, and stood still watching the customer walk away. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. The light turned green. Horns jolted him awake. He sped up, turned at the first corner, and parked in the first open spot. He got out of the car. His hands trembled slightly, but his steps were sure. Victoria was arranging some flowers at the counter when she heard the door open. She turned slowly. For a second, they stood in silence. Jonathan stepped forward. "Forgive me," was all he could say. She looked at him, without anger, but also without urgency. In her eyes, there was something he had never seen before. Freedom. Victoria took a deep breath, and with a steady voice, replied, "I no longer carry the burden of proving who I am. And for the first time, that's enough for me." After Victoria's firm statement, Jonathan remained silent. He lowered his eyes, nodded softly, and was about to say goodbye, respecting the space she deserved. But then, in a soft voice, almost as a gesture of compassion, she said, "Would you like a coffee?" Jonathan closed his eyes slowly and took a deep breath. The weight in his chest gave way to unexpected relief. He nodded, almost voiceless. They sat at the small table inside the flower shop, a space surrounded by pots, hanging leaves, unfinished arrangements. The scent of soil and lavender filled the air. Jonathan was nervous. His hands rested stiffly on his thighs, but he knew he needed to speak. And so he opened up. "I let you go when you needed support the most. I chose to believe what was easiest. And what hurts me most is that you didn't even try to defend yourself. You just walked away. With dignity." He swallowed hard, looked around, as if seeking support from the simple walls of that place, and continued, "Emily manipulated everything, and I let her. I was weak, cowardly." Victoria listened, in silence. Then she spoke, calmly, without bitterness, with the strength of someone who doesn't need to raise their voice to be heard. "I've seen a lot in life, Mr. Jonathan. Many forms of manipulation. A lot of cruelty disguised as care. I've learned that sometimes the best thing to do is leave the stage. Peace is better than being right." She paused briefly, No matter how well a plan is executed, the truth always comes out. However long it takes, it appears. Jonathan took a deep breath. Please, he interrupted softly. Just call me Jonathan. Victoria smiled, faintly. I don't hold a grudge against you, Jonathan. On the contrary, I saw in you a man with a good heart. How many people in your position would take a homeless girl into their home? It sounds like something out of a movie. She lowered her eyes for a moment. I'm deeply grateful for what you did for me. That opportunity changed my life. With the little I saved, I rented a small room, bought clothes, got a job, dignity. People began to look at me differently. What everyone did for me in that house changed my fate. Jonathan listened, almost in disbelief. You're thanking me? After everything? After everything I let happen? He looked at her as if seeing something sacred. How did you go through all that and still manage to be grateful? Victoria just looked at him, with tear-filled but calm eyes. Because what was done to me doesn't define who I am, but what I do with it does. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, speechless. I have a lot to learn from you, he said quietly. Much more than I imagined. He hesitated, then repeated, Forgive me. His phone vibrated on the table. Jonathan looked. It was the friend with the country house. You lost? The house is at the end of the road, not invisible, the message said. Jonathan gave a small laugh. It's my friend Philip. I was on my way to see a property in the countryside. A house he's selling. I guess I just needed silence. Victoria nodded, looking around. Silence and flowers saved my mental health. She looked at her hands, then at him. You know, sometimes roots can only grow once they're out of the wrong pot. Jonathan smiled, and this time with the lightness of someone who, for the first time in a long while, was exactly where he was meant to be. The following week, Jonathan finalized the purchase of the country house. The place welcomed him in a way he couldn't quite explain. It was silence without guilt, wind without weight, a kind of peace he had never known, and no longer wanted to postpone. At the flower shop where Victoria now worked, the routine remained simple. But on a Tuesday morning, an unusual request arrived. An architect, elegant, professional, and kind, entered with blueprints in hand and plant diagrams spread across the table. I'm working on the landscaping for a new property and want to do the entire project with you. That's quite a lot, Victoria replied, surprised. And it'll grow. But there's no rush. My client is willing to wait as long as necessary. He's also not concerned about costs. He just wants everything done with care. Victoria was stunned. It was a request far too big for the flower shop's small-scale operation. But it was also a chance to grow, to expand, to find new suppliers, to restart on a larger scale. She accepted. Weeks went by. On the day of delivery, Victoria insisted on accompanying the team personally. She organized the truck, labeled each plant, prepared documents, and gave out instructions. This project could open doors, she whispered to herself while checking the lavender with her delicate hands. They arrived at the location late in the morning. When the gates opened, Victoria held her breath for a moment. The country house looked like a painting. Light-toned walls, a wide porch, tall trees surrounding the property. And in the middle of the freshly landscaped garden, a space marked by white stones, reserved, untouched, as if waiting for something. Where should I place the lavenders? She asked the architect. The woman smiled. One moment. That was a specific request from my client. I'll check with him. Victoria nodded, still unsuspecting. And then she heard footsteps. She turned, and there was Jonathan. He walked calmly, hands in the pockets of his linen trousers, without his usual tie. His beard lighter, hair slightly messy, and gaze much calmer. But it was him, and he didn't seem like he wanted to surprise her, just be present. He stopped a few feet away and spoke in a low, steady voice. On the day of our conversation, I kept smelling lavender in the air. It was everywhere. It was like everything there was at peace, and I was too. So I asked them to plant a space just for lavender. Here. A place where I could remember that moment. The clarity it brought me. Victoria held the label in her hands, silent. Jonathan nodded toward the spot with his chin. You can plant them there, under the oak tree. She nodded, and for the first time smiled faintly. No words, but perhaps the roots were finally beginning to find the right soil. As the last plants were unloaded, Victoria glanced at Jonathan discreetly, still not fully understanding how this meeting had happened, again. He, in turn, seemed comfortable, serene. He didn't seek to invade any space, nor create any tension. He was simply there. When the team finished, Victoria approached, holding the clipboard against her chest. Thank you, she said sincerely, for choosing to buy the plants from our flower shop. That made a huge difference for us. I'm not sure if you even realize. Jonathan looked into her eyes, smiled softly, and replied without hesitation. It was a natural choice. Well, she returned a small smile. If you need anything else, just let us know. He looked around, took a deep breath. Actually, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, slightly awkward, would you like to see the property? It's still kind of empty, no landscaping yet, but I think it has potential. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. Sure, I'd love to. They walked together across the wide space, following the dirt paths that crisscrossed the lawn and lined the edge of a small lake that mirrored the clear sky. Jonathan pointed out each corner like someone rediscovering things as he spoke. Here, I was thinking of planting a small orchard. In the back, maybe an herb garden. And he pointed to a flatter area. I'm considering building some stables. Victoria stopped, eyes wide. Stables? You're going to have horses. Jonathan smiled at her surprise. Yes, I want to. I've always thought this place suits horses. Imagine weekend morning rides. She took a deep breath, and her face lit up like he had never seen before. You have no idea, she said, looking out toward the horizon. When I was little, in the orphanage, one of the staff used to ride a horse to work. He would tie it near the yard. And she smiled, glancing at him, slightly shy. I'd spend hours petting it, talking to it like it was my friend. I think that's when I fell in love with horses. I always dreamed of having one someday. But she gave a short laugh. It stayed just a dream. Jonathan watched her in silence. He didn't interrupt. There was something about that moment, almost sacred. I think some dreams were just waiting for the right place, he said, looking around. Before they realized it, the trucks had gone. The professionals had disappeared. Only they remained, walking casually, as if time had forgotten to pass inside that place. The sky began to change color. The setting sun painted the lake's surface golden. The trees cast long, elegant shadows. The breeze made the leaves dance in silence. Without saying a word, the two approached the lake. They sat at the edge in silence, just watched, the sunset reflecting in the water, the sound of the leaves, the scent of fresh soil. For a few minutes, they didn't seem like two adults with complicated pasts. Just two souls resting in the same place. You know, Jonathan said in a low voice, almost like a prayer, I think peace is this. It's not the absence of pain, nor the absence of the past. It's just when everything you see finally makes sense. Victoria took a deep breath, smiled, and replied, gazing at the horizon. Maybe that's all life needs. A place where we can bloom without fear. When the sun had nearly disappeared, Jonathan stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and offered her his hand. Come on, I'll take you home. She hesitated for a second. "Oh, don't worry. I'll get a ride." "No way. I won't let you go back alone after helping me transform this place." "Well, if that's the case," she smiled. "Then I accept." On the way to the small neighborhood where she lived, a simple house with a rented room near the flower shop, the atmosphere in the car was light. No longer tense. They talked about horses, flower types, how she would choose each plant if the garden were hers. And without even realizing it, they were building something. Maybe a garden. Maybe trust. The next day, Victoria returned to the flower shop as if waking up from a dream. But at the same time, something about her felt different. Lighter. It had only been work, she knew. And yet, there was a peace that remained. The sound of the water in the lake, the smell of the earth, the sunset reflected on the surface. It had stayed with her, inside her. Mid-morning, the flower shop phone rang. It was an unknown number. She picked up. "Hello. Good morning, Victoria. It's Jonathan. I hope I'm not interrupting." She held the phone for a second, almost surprised by her own reaction. But her voice came out firm, natural. "No, not at all. Is everything okay? I was here, looking at the land, and realized I need more help than I thought. You understand this much better than I do. And, well, I don't just want someone to sell me plants. I want someone to help me give this place a soul." She paused for a few seconds. A smile formed on her lips before she could stop it. "You want me to help with the landscaping?" "Exactly. If you'd like to, of course. As a consultant, I want this garden to be more than just beautiful." Victoria looked down at her hands, thought for a moment, and replied in a light tone, almost joking. "Consultant, huh?" She smiled. "That sounds way too fancy for me. It's just a title. What I really want is for you to help me turn this place into a home." She took a deep breath. "All right, I'll accept. But on one condition." "What is it?" "You'll have to understand that plants take time. You can't rush them or force them. They grow in their own time." Jonathan smiled on the other end of the line. "I think that might be one of the best lessons I could ever learn." In the following days, Victoria began visiting the property regularly. In the mornings, she walked the land, taking notes, sketching simple designs in an old notebook filled with doodles of leaves, flowers, ideas. Jonathan, at first, followed at a respectful distance. He watched how she touched each plant, how she measured space with her eyes, how she smiled to herself when an idea struck. Little by little, he began to come closer, not like someone intruding, but like someone allowing themselves to be present. "Here, I think rosemary would be lovely," she said one day, crouching down, running her hand over the soil. "They thrive with little care, are resilient, and the smell," she rubbed the leaves gently, "smells like home." Jonathan knelt beside her. "And over there," he pointed, "how about a bench? Near that oak tree. The shade there is great." Victoria looked, smiled. Perfect. Between plant suggestions, laughter, walks, and even small disagreements about what should go where, they began filling the space, and without realizing it, they also began filling the empty spaces life had left in each of them. He talked about the horses he wanted to get. She talked about how she imagined a small herb garden, with fresh spices, edible flowers, lavender, basil, and thyme. At one point, Jonathan said, "You know, I think I've never been this excited about something that wasn't a contract." She laughed. Welcome to the world of things money can't buy. And so, day by day, they built something. No one knew if it was a garden, a friendship, or something more. They only knew that, in that place, roots were starting to settle. And maybe love is exactly that. Something that grows when you're no longer looking for it. At the end of each day, as they returned to their own homes, Jonathan and Victoria carried something they didn't know how to name, but they could feel it. Jonathan drove home smiling, and often caught himself smiling alone. His thoughts would drift back to her, like her presence had sunk into the property, into the trees, the smell of lavender, the sound of the wind. He'd sit at his computer and, without realizing, start searching. How to care for rosemary, plants that attract butterflies, sensory gardens for horses, how to compost. He smiled. It was official. He was in love. Victoria was no different. She'd get home, sit on her bed, and spend hours looking at the sketches in her notebook. She drew paths, benches, pergolas, wrote down ideas, and, without meaning to, she would draw him, small, somewhere in the corner, holding a tree sapling or pointing at something. She'd close the notebook, laugh to herself, and shake her head. "Victoria, you're totally gone," she'd say to herself, wearing the most genuine smile she'd had in years. While they cultivated something invisible, life quietly began to blossom around them. The architect, impressed with the service, began recommending the flower shop to other clients, important people, big projects. The once modest store began to grow. More trucks arrived, more orders, and inevitably more staff. Victoria, already the heart of the place, was promoted to manager. No one there doubted that she was the one who made everything run smoothly. Impeccable organization, sharp eye, patience with customers, and above all, love for what she did. The elderly owner of the flower shop smiled. "I don't manage anything here anymore. Miss Victoria is the boss now." She laughed, but deep down she knew it was true. A few days had passed since that conversation about the garden and the horses. And on a Friday night, Victoria received a call from Jonathan. "Tomorrow," he said, with that tone of excitement she was starting to recognize, "is the day. The horses are arriving. I was wondering if you'd come with me to welcome them." She smiled, holding back her excitement. "Of course I will." The next morning, Jonathan picked her up at her place. She got into the car wearing a smile she could barely contain, and he, trying to play it cool, was barely holding in his own. The drive to the farm was light, full of conversation, laughter, and comments about how that place already felt like a part of their lives. When they arrived, the excitement was almost childlike. The transport truck was already there, and as the horses came down, Jonathan looked at her, holding back laughter. "They're so beautiful. I almost want to keep them inside the house." She laughed, enchanted, petting the animals, who, curiously, seemed just as at ease as they were. Jonathan invited her to stay for lunch. They prepared something simple, rustic, but perfect. In the afternoon, with the help of a trainer, they went for their first ride. Victoria was anxious, nervous. I've never been on a horse before," she confessed, holding the reins, taking deep breaths. Jonathan gently took her hand. "Then I think today you're going to find out what freedom feels like." And she did. When she finally felt safe, the horse began to walk. And that wind on her face, the sound of the hooves, the feeling of moving in harmony with such a powerful animal, it was the greatest sense of freedom she had ever experienced. At the end of the day, still euphoric, she thanked him, eyes misty. "Jonathan, thank you. Truly, that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life." They were sitting by the lake, watching the sunset, when she added, in a softer tone, "And, this week is my birthday, and for the first time, I feel like it actually means something." Jonathan looked at her, surprised. "Your birthday? When?" "Wednesday. I've always spent it at the cemetery, with my parents." It hit Jonathan like a punch to the chest. He, who grew up with parties, gifts, and celebrations, had never stopped to think about what it truly meant. And in that moment, without her even noticing, he was already making plans. On Wednesday, Victoria woke up as if it were any other day. She worked as usual at the flower shop when she received a message from the architect. "Can you come with me to the farm? We have a problem in the project I need to review with Jonathan." Of course she said yes. Halfway there, the architect took a slightly longer route. Let's just stop here to look at some materials. Victoria didn't suspect anything. But when they arrived at the farm, the architect got a fake phone call and said, "Go ahead. I'll catch up with you." Victoria walked through the gate, and as soon as she stepped into the main area, she heard, "Surprise!" Everyone was there. The people from the flower shop, from the inn where she lived, the architect, and in the middle, smiling Marie, the woman who, without knowing it, had changed her fate. The space was delicately and elegantly decorated, full of flowers, hanging lights, flowing fabrics. It was a dream garden, a perfect reflection of who Victoria was. She put her hand over her mouth, crying, unable to contain the emotion. Jonathan appeared, smiling, with a bouquet in his hands. "Happy birthday, Victoria." She was moved. "How did you all pull this off without me noticing?" And she hugged everyone. The party was magical. There was cake, dancing, laughter, tears, and something Victoria had never felt before, belonging. When the guests began to leave, only the two of them remained. She said, "I don't even know how to thank you. This was the best day of my life." Jonathan took a deep breath and replied, "It's not over yet." He gently took her hand. "Come with me." They walked to the stable. There he stopped, asked for permission, and then covered her eyes with his hand. He guided her slowly, feeling her smile under his palm. "Ready?" he asked. He removed his hand, and right in front of her stood a horse. White coat, long mane, gentle eyes, and a huge bow tied around its neck. "This is Liberty, my birthday gift to you. I hope you two live many beautiful moments together." Victoria brought her hands to her mouth, unable to hold back her tears. She turned, and without thinking, hugged him. Jonathan stood still for a second, as if the world had stopped. Then he pulled her close. A hug that seemed to last for days. A hug with no words, just everything they had never managed to say. When they pulled apart a little, their eyes met. Their hearts raced. Jonathan lifted his hand to her face, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and without a word, drew her gently closer. Their faces moved in, and in an instant their lips met. First just a touch, then a kiss full of feeling, care, tenderness, truth. A kiss both of them had been carrying inside for a long time. Afterward, they just stayed like that, looking at each other, smiling, hardly believing that moment was real. Jonathan held her face with both hands, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, "I don't know how I lived this long without this." Victoria closed her eyes, holding on to that moment like she was holding the entire world. She placed her hands over his and smiled, unsure how to hold so much feeling. Then he looked at her, still holding her. "Do you want to take your horse for its first ride?" She laughed, emotional. I've never wanted anything so much in my life." They mounted together, side by side. They didn't need a trail or a destination. They just rode through the property. As night began to fall, under a lavender sky, golden and peaceful. When they dismounted, they let Liberty rest near the lake. They sat by the edge. Jonathan embraced her, and she laid her head on his shoulder. They stayed there, watching the sunset, in silence, but a silence that said everything. You could hear their hearts beating from there. They sealed that moment with one more kiss. Long, deep, the kind that comes when there's nowhere left to run. On the way back, they led Liberty to the barn. As they stepped outside, the night brought a cozy chill. Victoria crossed her arms, feeling the breeze. Without thinking, Jonathan took off his shirt, placed it over her shoulders, and in the same movement, pulled her into a hug. That kind of hug that already knows the other person's arms are home. They walked to the house. He lit the fireplace, opened a bottle of wine, and proposed a toast. "To your birthday, to your new year of life." and to everything still to come. Victoria didn't even know how to respond. She just smiled. The kind of smile she had never given before. The full moon lit up everything, as if even the universe was celebrating the moment. They sat there on the fluffy rug, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars through the glass window. They talked about simple things. And at some point between one glass of wine and another, they fell asleep. Jonathan, used to stronger drinks, woke up first. Victoria still slept deeply, curled up. He quietly stepped outside, making no noise. Outside, the day was perfect. The sun reflected on the lake. The plants sparkled. Butterflies fluttered. Birds sang. When Victoria woke up, she looked around, realized where she was. And for a second, her chest tightened. He wasn't there. She feared the worst. Maybe she had been too forward. Maybe he regretted it. She quickly got dressed, slipped on her shoes, and with her heart racing, walked toward the exit. But when she crossed the door, she saw a beautifully set table beneath the oak tree in the garden. Jonathan, wearing an apron, flipping pancakes in the pan, turned around. "You woke up before the pancakes were ready. That's not fair." Laughing, he picked a flower, walked up to her and said, "Good morning," to the most beautiful flower in this garden. "Hope your back's not sore." Victoria laughed, relieved. "Is this all real?" she asked, unsure if she had woken up or was still dreaming. While Jonathan made breakfast, she took a shower, slipped into a pair of sweatpants and one of his white t-shirts, which made Jonathan smile when he saw her. "I don't think I've ever seen you more beautiful," he confessed, looking her up and down. They sat down to eat, and at one point, he took her hand and said, "This place only feels alive with you here." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. She just smiled. And, as if the whole world disappeared, they kissed. Once more, the way only those who truly love know how to do. Throughout the week, the days were busy, but every night, they talked on the phone. "Victoria, I'm counting the days until I see you again." She smiled, a little foolishly, like someone who finally knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Meanwhile, the flower shop was bursting with work. Clients kept coming. And with the new demand, a new arrangement department was created. Victoria discovered a floral design course in Paris, and she decided she was going to invest her savings in it. When she told Jonathan, he was thrilled. "You're going to be the best, I have no doubt." But in the middle of all the excitement, she let her fear slip. I've never flown on a plane, never stayed in a hotel, never done any of this. I don't even know where to start." Without even thinking, Jonathan replied, "If you want, I'll go with you." Of course she wanted. And so, carrying not only bags but also scars, memories, and dreams, they boarded the plane together. At the window, Victoria stared at the clouds, the vastness. She held his hand like an anchor, but also like someone holding on to herself, saying, "I made it. I'm here. I am everything they once said I'd never be." Jonathan, from time to time, looked at her when she wasn't watching, and smiled, because maybe there was no one in the world he admired more. They arrived in Paris, and everything looked more beautiful, not just because of the city, not just for the architecture, the cafes, the cobblestone streets, or the blooming fields of Versailles. It was more beautiful because they were there together. They had 2 free days before Victoria's course began. At first, she insisted on booking her own accommodation, a simple place on Airbnb within her budget. She made it clear she didn't want financial help from Jonathan. He, in turn, rented a room next door. But of course, he also reserved a suite in a hotel facing the Eiffel Tower just in case. They brought their luggage each to their own room and agreed to meet for dinner. Jonathan, who knew Paris well, suggested an elegant restaurant. Victoria, embarrassed, replied, I don't even have clothes for a place like that. Jonathan held back a laugh, looked into her eyes, and said in that tone only he had, "Your beauty draws more attention than any designer dress. What I want is for you to experience the food there." She entered the restaurant shy, uncomfortable, unsure how to behave in such a place. Jonathan noticed, of course. He got up discreetly, whispered something to the waiter, and then returned to her. He held out his hand. "Come with me." Victoria stood up, not really understanding. They entered an elevator, walked down a short hallway, and Jonathan opened a door. On the other side, a suite with a huge balcony, where the Eiffel Tower looked so close it seemed like a movie set. Illuminated, majestic, perfect. "I thought you might feel more comfortable here." "This?" She paused, not knowing how to react. "This is surreal. It's beautiful." They sat at the balcony table and ordered dinner right there. The food was simply wonderful. Then they opened a bottle of wine. And then another. Under the light of the tower, under the sound of their own laughter, their own smiles. Until, in a small mishap, Jonathan spilled wine on his shirt. "Ah, what a mess. I ruined my clothes," he said, getting up and looking for something to dry with. Laughing, he added, "I'm going to take a quick shower to clean this up." He went into the bathroom. Victoria stayed on the balcony, enchanted, watching the magic of the glowing tower, until she heard a shout from inside. "Victoria, can you hand me a towel, please?" She went in, laughing, looking for the towel. When she entered, she noticed there was absolutely nothing blocking the view. Jonathan, naked, tried to hide, but not very successfully, as she approached with the towel. "Stop trying to peek," he joked, smiling, and splashed water at her. "Oh no," she replied, laughing. "You soaked my clothes." Playfully, she tried to hit him with the towel, but Jonathan grabbed it. He pulled her firmly close to him, bringing her under the shower. And without thinking, he kissed her. A kiss so intense it felt like the whole world had disappeared. In that moment, there was only the two of them. And it was, without a doubt, the most beautiful night either of them could imagine. In that magical place, on a magical night, they belonged to each other. In the days that followed, each morning Jonathan drove Victoria to her course. He walked her to the door, holding a cup of coffee, watching her disappear inside, always turning back to wave with that smile he could no longer live without. In the afternoons, he wandered the city, took notes of places he knew she'd love, picked flowers from street markets, discovered small cafes, just so he could later take her there. And when she stepped out of class, there he was, waiting, arms crossed, smiling, like someone who had waited for her his whole life. "So, madam," he'd say, offering his arm, "where to today?" And they'd walk. No destination, no hurry, no plan, because everything they needed already walked beside them. Their days in Paris were a dream, not just for Victoria, but for Jonathan too. He, who had always been surrounded by luxury, numbers, and meetings, never imagined he could find so much beauty in the simplicity of life. And maybe, deep down, he finally understood true luxury was being by her side. Back in their routines, Victoria applied every detail she'd learned from the course. The flower shop thrived like never before. And soon, she took an even bigger step. She opened her own store. But it wasn't just any store. It was a temple of flowers. Delicate, elegant, full of personality, where every arrangement carried her signature. A signature that, in no time, became synonymous with good taste, refinement, and sensitivity. To place an order, you had to book in advance. Her name became a reference. Still, Victoria never lost her greatest treasure, her humility. She made new friends, met important people, learned about fashion, fine dining, elegance, etiquette. But none of that ever took her away from the woman she had always been. She left the old flower shop as a home that transforms but is never forgotten. She grew. They grew. The original shop stayed strong, now specializing in landscaping, and also became a market reference. Jonathan, meanwhile, kept working, but gradually began delegating more and more at the office, because he knew exactly where his true place was. His heart now lived on the farm, preferably beside Victoria. One Saturday morning, as they rode horses together, as they did nearly every weekend, the sun began to paint gold across the horizon. The sound of hooves, the breeze, the scent of lavender. Suddenly, Jonathan got off his horse. He stopped, stood there in silence, head down, right in the middle of the lavender garden, the very one that long ago marked the beginning of everything. Victoria frowned, stepped off her horse too, and asked, concerned, "What is it, John? Are you okay?" He took a deep breath. When he looked up, his eyes were already glistening. "Victoria," his voice came out low, almost a whisper, "I can't anymore. I don't want to live a single day without you." Then he got down on one knee, pulled a velvet box from his pocket, opened it, and there it was, a ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. "Will you marry me?" At that very moment, as if it understood everything happening, Liberdade neighed, lifting its head and pawing the ground. Victoria covered her face with her hands, knelt in front of him, hugged him tightly and, through tears, said, 1,000 times yes. "I love you. And I love you. I don't want to spend another night apart. Never again." Unlike the wedding preparations with Emily, this time, everything was different. Jonathan didn't want anything that wasn't completely Victoria. He asked about every detail, every wish, and she answered from the heart. "I want a simple ceremony, intimate, under the oak tree, barefoot, surrounded by nature, by the simplicity that represents everything we are." Jonathan took her hand, eyes filled with tears, and said, "I only wish your father could be here, to walk you down the aisle to me." She gently squeezed his hand back and smiled. "I do too, but I've chosen someone just as important, to walk me to you at the altar." He stayed silent. The mystery lingered in the air. The big day had arrived. The sky was clear. The breeze was perfect. The sound of birds blended with laughter, footsteps, and hands adjusting the final details. The farm looked magical. Light, flowing fabrics danced between the trees. Wildflowers adorned everything. It was simple, and precisely because of that, it was absolutely enchanting. The guests were already seated, all filled with anticipation. Jonathan stood facing the altar, hands trembling, breathing deeply. His thoughts circled in a loop. Will she come? What if she changed her mind? What if she doesn't show up? Until, from between the fluttering white fabrics, she appeared. Victoria, stunning, radiant, perfect, arm in arm with Marie. Of course it would be Marie. If not for her, this love, this story wouldn't even exist. A collective gasp swept through the guests, and Jonathan couldn't hold it in. Tears fell without asking permission. She came, he whispered to himself. Victoria, smiling wide, walked the flower-lined path. Her eyes saw only him. Marie, emotional, walked her to Jonathan and gently joined their hands, as if sealing not just a wedding, but a destiny. The ceremony was everything they were. Simple in form, massive in meaning, intense, honest, unforgettable. Vows were whispered, not for the world to hear, but just for each other. Vows that didn't need to be loud, only real. Their eyes spoke louder than any words. Their smiles blended with tears, unashamed, unhurried. There, beneath the old oak tree, their bare feet touching the earth and their hearts touching the sky, they exchanged their vows. And when the kiss happened, applause, tears, sighs, smiles. It felt like even the wind was clapping. The sunset bore silent witness to one of the most beautiful scenes that farm had ever seen. And then came the celebration. Free laughter, tight hugs, people knowing they were witnessing something rare. The kind of love you don't just stumble upon. The kind of love you build. The party was still going strong when Victoria and Jonathan quietly slipped away. The driver was already waiting, bags packed in the trunk, a smile on his face. They were off to their honeymoon. First destination, Seychelles, North Island, pure paradise, exclusive, silent, just the two of them. After that, no one knew, not even them, because now the entire world was finally open. The truth is, when you find the love of your life, the destination doesn't matter. What matters is who goes with you. And if their next destination were your country, what place would you recommend for their honeymoon? Leave it in the comments. Your idea might inspire someone else's love story. Thanks for watching until the end. See you in the next story.